Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. This is the most recent episode of One Square at a Time, a leadership perspective of how to build the best tools for everybody in your tool belt, for every team you have, with only being able to move one square at a time. I'm Brandon Croucher, CEO of Delight Cafe. This is my very handsome colleague, Mr. Brett Gordon, CEO of Businesses Are People Too. And today's episode, we are going to talk about one of the classic movies from of all kids, of all kids and families. It's an adult comedy / kid comedy all in one. My favorite character of all is Donkey, and that's just because he's fucking awesome. So, how are you, my friend?
Awesome. How else can you be after you just got through watching 3 Shrek movies and getting a chance to really look more deeply into what was going on within the characters and how this whole thing was presented and how it applies to life in leading ourselves, me, myself, and I, that big team there, that hardest team to manage, and how it relates to the things that are going on around us.
Yep.
I thought it was really cool and kind of apropos in that Shrek lives in the swamp, and all we heard about for the past couple of years is draining the swamp. Then where the hell would Shrek live if we drain the swamp? Maybe sometimes we actually have to learn how that we actually all live in our own swamp, and we have to accept and kind of appreciate where other people's swamps are, where they live, and figure out how that we can all live together, yet keeping some form of the swamp we live in.
I agree. I think that Shrek's swamp is something that's he lived in a swamp, but I think what's interesting about it is how we all live in our own swamps in our own ways at times. And I just think that would be something that is, if you're stuck in your own swamp of your mind at times, getting able to get out of that's tough. But with today's society and all that, the swamp was something we heard about for the last 5 years, about them draining the swamp. So go ahead, let's let you dive in. I think you already have a plan of where you're gonna go with this. You looked like
it's pretty free flowing. I just was thinking about that whole concept as I was watching and going, when you're living in your swamp, that's home. And most often you've either gotten used to it or comfortable with it or whatever. And then when you look at where somebody else is and their swamp, you either, like in this case, you look at far away, and you resent it because it's different than your swamp. Maybe it's more opulent than your swamp, but is it really more comfortable than your swamp? And I think that that's one of the things that we tend not to do. We tend to look at something and then either think that the grass is greener on the other side, or that our grass is greener and we don't want to go there. And as a result, we start to build a divide. We start to build a wall. We start to build a dividing line between our swamp and their swamp. And if you're on their swamp, then you're not into my swamp. You're not part of my group. And if you're, and vice versa. And that's what's kind of troubling when we tend to look at things from that perspective. And oftentimes we get put into our swamp, or we move into our swamp because of what others may have said, and then we start to take them to heart. We start to believe them, and the next thing you know, everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything that happens around us starts to fall into that perceived swamp that we've now chosen to kind of live in.
For sure. And go ahead.
No, no, go.
I was just going to say, and it's funny because when they all went to the swamp, nobody really wanted to be there, but Shrek wanted to be there, and that was his home, and we made fun of it. And that his thing that was weird was the castle and far, far away.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You know, sometimes we move into a swamp. Sometimes the swamp really is our home. Like, you know, for ogres, that's where they enjoyed living, and they enjoyed, and in Shrek's case, he really liked it because it was very private and nobody else was in there. And he had pretty much turned away from the world because of the way that he perceived everybody looked at him.
Yeah.
And there was one scene that I thought was really, really telling there, and it was where, you know, before Fiona showed that she was an ogre at night.
Yeah.
And Shrek, hopefully everybody's seen the movie, so we're not going to go through too much of.
Even if you haven't, guess what? We're going to go through it, and you should go watch it because there's a
yeah, you should definitely go watch it because a lot of this stuff is going to piece together when you understand the story a little bit better. But we'll kind of talk about it. Anyhow, you know, Shrek had to go and get Fiona, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Lord Farquaad was too chicken to be able to do it himself. Or you might say he was too short-sighted, too short-tempered, too
short-lived.
Anyhow, so she's in the background, and Donkey is talking with Shrek because Shrek is kind of pissed off, and Donkey says to him, "Okay, who are you trying to keep out?" And Shrek is like, "Everyone, okay?" And Donkey's like, "Well, what's your problem, Shrek? What you got against the whole world?" And Shrek comes back, "I'm not the one who's got the problem, okay? It's the world that seems to have a problem with me. People take one look at me and go, ah, help, run! A big, stupid, ugly ogre. They judge me before they even get to know me. That's why I'm better off alone." And you know what? There's a lot of people that think the same way about themselves. They have kind of isolated themselves or surrounded themselves only with a very few if they are comfortable with a few. And then there's others that really stay back and they really believe that, you know, every time somebody sees them, that there's this, the others have a negative impression of them. No, that's most often that's our perception of what we're projecting on them as their projection of us, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Shrek thinks that everybody hates him and they're judging him, so he leaves it at that since they're already going to judge. It's like,
yeah, he's had some experiences where he was bullied or he was made fun of or people ran away from him. So then he generalized that to everybody is doing that.
Correct.
And that's where kind of Donkey came into it because Donkey didn't see him that way. And even though Shrek was trying to push Donkey away when Donkey first came into the swamp, Donkey was like, "I'm still going to hang out here. Yeah, you won't let me stay in the house. Okay, I'm going to stay outside." But he didn't leave. And sometimes that's what it takes. It takes somebody, something, whatever, to come into your life to actually start to break that pattern that you have in your head of being untouchable.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. And then you start to change your perception because now from everybody not liking you, wait a second, there is somebody that likes me. And if we actually appreciate that, because I would venture to guess in almost anybody's life or everybody's life, there's at least one person that appreciates them. And if you're going to say, no, nobody appreciates me, how about your dog? How about your cat? How about your pet fish?
How about your plant? And you think I'm kidding on
Exactly.
it. Your plant relies on you, and the sooner people realize things like that, the better, because they don't realize how that little bit of thing makes such a big difference. Shrek talked negative, and look where he lived, in a swamp that everybody thought was scary and dark. It's what's interesting is how Shrek's light is one that is such brightness that even in far, far away where everybody wants to be, it's not the right light for him. And that's just interesting to me how that plays into life and people and just how we function as a society. But go ahead. So Shrek's in his head. He's in the swamp.
You know, and he becomes this antisocial, very territorial person because he does love the solitude of the swamp. And people, there's nothing wrong with wanting or liking being, you know, in having your own space, having solitude when you want it. Not always being, you know, a super social, because not everybody is. In fact, I'm not. I'm not somebody who loves to be around people all the time. That really starts to make me anxious, to be honest, because I have to appreciate where they're coming from. And if I have to do that all the time, then I'm not really building on the energy that usually recharges my batteries. I'm usually expending energy. Now, there's other people that are much more social. I think you're a lot more social, where going out and being with people helps to recharge your batteries.
So yes and no. So I everybody thinks I'm this outward social crazy get me out there person, right? Like that's how I come across. I'm not. I am, but I'm not. I'm very good at entertaining. I'm very good at distracting. I'm very good at keeping your attention. I'm bored very easily. And because of that, people think that I'm an extrovert. And it's really not that. It's I thrive on conversation, and good conversation keeps me going. And I crash with people who don't want to keep a conversation going, like hard. And I say that as you and I have talked about how fast I can crash at the end of a night. Real, it's I have this energy. Like here, you see me doing all this. Where right before this, you and I were talking, and you were like, "You look tired." It's I know how to turn it on, and I can keep it on for hours. It's that other self. It's knowing when I need to. Where Shrek knew yelling at people, like fighting. He knew he needed to do something for Shrek to protect himself at times. So like I'm not Shrek. I kind of look like him today, but like I'm not like Shrek, but I'm also not like Donkey. Donkey would be one I would say is a complete.
He loved being around and talking to people. He was always about talking.
Everybody thinks I'm Donkey, but it's funny. I really am not.
That's funny. Everybody thinks I'm an ass. Oh, wait a second.
Like you baited your own joke for yourself. Like, well done. But like for real, like Donkey doesn't shut up. Fiona is beautiful, then turns into an ogre and was embarrassed of it and had to see that she's not alone before she could actually like represent herself.
Yeah. So
anything for you there? Sorry.
No. So I guess we got to kind of go back a couple of steps and kind of talk about the story a little bit. You know, part of the reason that Shrek really got upset is that this Lord Farquaad basically kicked all of the untouchables, all of the ones, the people that were unacceptable or unaccepted out of his kingdom and pushed them into the swamp. And now Shrek opens his door and it's just, his swamp is full of creatures, of people, of whatever that were not accepted and were kicked out of the kingdom of far, far away. And I'm sorry, of Dulak. That was Lord Farquaad's empire. kingdom, lorddom, whatever. Anyhow, so he's pissed off and he's like, I got to go take care of this. I got to get these people out of here because they all came here because they got kicked out of where they're going. So he goes in to try to get Farquaad to let these people back because he wants them out of his swamp. And there's a whole bunch of things that go on. Eventually, what happens is there's Farquaad says, okay, I will do that if you get go out and get the princess Fiona and bring her back to me. Right?
Sorry, I'm just remembering a bunch of the jokes. Like, I was remembering how many other princesses he went after, but he only wanted Fiona. So I started laughing because of all the other ones. I pictured like Rapunzel in my head and all that.
Yeah, and actually Farquaad thinks that this is it because Farquaad was looking at like the kind of mirror or the mirror that Snow White looked, you know, who's the fairest of them all. And he wanted to be king, but he couldn't be king unless he married a princess. That's what came out. So he picks out this princess, it's Princess Fiona. He doesn't have enough guts to go get her himself. And he's a very short-statured person, so they make fun of him being not quite up to the task, if you want to call it that.
What's funny is the actor that plays him is actually very tall.
Yeah.
I'm like picturing them next to each other. I'm like, oh, that would have been funny to picture, like have that guy have two characters. I forget the actor's name, but whatever. So go ahead. So she has to do the king's dirty work.
Right. So Shrek goes on to find the princess and bring her back, and Donkey ends up coming with him, even though Shrek only let him come along reluctantly. And Donkey never shuts up. So Donkey's talking to Shrek all the time, and Shrek's like, "Shut up, shut up." And Donkey's like, "Yeah, okay." And for about 1 second, he's quiet, and then he's talking again.
I feel like you baited me there. You baited me by taking a drink there.
No, I was like, okay, scratch your throat. So, drink something.
You were waiting to see if I was going to talk. I was like, and then I couldn't help it. I laughed.
So Shrek comes in. Fiona's up in this tower. He's got to break in. He's got to save the princess from the tower. He saves her, brings her down, and he's wearing this helmet at the time, so she doesn't really know that he's an ogre. He's her savior. In fact, she's under the impression that she has to have a kiss. She has to have Prince Charming come and give her a kiss to break the spell, because during the day she's this beautiful, quote unquote, beautiful princess, and then at night she turns into an ogre, and she thinks that if she gets a kiss from Prince Charming, that she's going to turn into who she should be, and she thinks that that's this beautiful princess. So anyhow, when Shrek takes off his helmet and she discovers he's an ogre, then she's all kind of pissed off because she's like, this isn't really Prince Charming, you're nothing but an ogre. And she really kind of starts to treat him again, kind of like he expects people to be treating him, with some disdain, and tries to stay away from him and things along those lines. And that was kind of where we pick up with what we started the show with, when he was talking about how he feels the whole world is against him, because this is now how Princess Fiona is treating him, and he thinks that that's the case. Now, she's in the background.
He's doing it because of being forced by the king, so he's still not under his own will. Like, he's doing it to protect his house and his swamp.
Right, and Fiona's just reinforcing the fact that, you know, everybody's against him and things like that. But because Fiona really knows what's going on with her at night, but Donkey and Shrek don't know it yet, when she hears this conversation between Donkey and Shrek about the whole world against Shrek, then she changes her the way she treats Shrek, because she knows that she's an ogre at night. And she just heard him think that way, and that's actually kind of how she was feeling about herself when she was an ogre.
Yeah.
Right. So now she's treating him nicely, and he doesn't expect it. He's like, "Why you treating me nice now?" It's like, what's your ulterior motive? You know, what's really going on here? And he's now treating her not so well. Plus, he overhears Donkey talking to her after Donkey discovers that she is an ogre at night. And she's talking about herself being ugly and all this kind of stuff, but Shrek is overhearing this conversation, and he's like, she's talking about me again. And this happens in life, where we have a mindset about who we are or who we think people think we are, and then we overhear somebody say something, and we immediately take it as they're talking about me. They may have been talking about it watching Shrek. They may have been talking about anything, but because we heard it and we've already got this mindset, we believe that they're talking about us. You making fun of me? Why are you looking at me? I'm looking at you because I'm staring out the window behind you. I'm not looking at you. But that's kind of the way that it's taken because of our preconceptions. And we have to realize that, you know, we're the ones who are actually thinking that. The other person most likely isn't. So I think all of these things really relate to how we live lives, how we live our lives. And even the privileged people look at it that way. You know, there's those that feel that regardless of what they do, they're okay. They can do whatever they want, and they've got the power to be able to do that. And that's almost like Lord Farquaad. And then you've got the others that are looking at themselves and calling themselves ourselves the ugly beast. And that's not true either.
Right.
It's usually in our own mind's eye. And we're always out there trying to find, you know, we want to find that true love's kiss that's going to, you know, make us into our better self. But really, without going into it too much, the true love's kiss has to come from ourselves to ourselves.
That's why I learned how to do that in high school.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean we kiss our own ass, because that actually is what we oftentimes do.
Yeah.
We have to.
That line, it's the line of confidence and cocky. And that's the big thing for people on that. Like, I know for me, I've had to learn that confidence is not the same as cocky, but it's a fine line. And it's with people doing this, going through it, it's hard for people to understand that sometimes they come across as cocky because others don't think they can do what they can do. So having confidence yourself is very important, where Shrek has all the confidence in himself, Fiona has none, but he has the bad talk. So I want to, yeah, he's negative self-talk, and he needs to do something better than that for himself. And he needs to be like Fiona, where she actually doesn't like herself, but like everybody thinks she's amazing because of the princess she is. And it's just interesting how opposite they are, but really not.
Right. And over the course of time, Shrek actually starts to really have feelings for Fiona. And this is even before he knows that she's an ogre or an ogress. And he wants
it?
Huh?
Is that what she called it?
What?
An ogress?
I think that's the feminine version of ogre.
I thought she called herself an ogre as well. I didn't think gave it.
I think she probably does, but when I'm describing it, I guess
I just was curious.
Ogre is ogre. I mean, human is human.
People are people.
People are people. Exactly.
And people are businesses too.
people are people too, and leaders are people too. So that's how all people are people too. Yeah. So anyhow, I think that, there's the whole story is set based upon our self-perceptions and how we interact because of the perceptions that we have of ourselves and because of how we think others view us. And, when we're not feeling good, not every day do you wake up feeling like you are the best person you can be. You may make mistakes. You may make some big mistakes, but that doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't make it a bad day. It can definitely be bad moments. And sometimes things are pretty challenging and they can last for a little bit longer. But if we start to accept them as part of ourselves, as the rule as opposed to the exception, that's when we start to get into trouble with the negative self-talk, with the negative self-impression. Those are the things that I think the movie points out. And you've got different characters that kind of play these different roles. And Fiona almost kind of plays in between. When she's looking like the beautiful princess, she feels like she's beautiful and accepted and will be accepted. And this is who I'm supposed to be. And then at night she turns into the ogre and she's like, I've got to hide. I've got to stay away. I'm having my bad part of the day, and I have to just survive it to get back into the light and the good part of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, when Shrek actually gets Fiona to Farquaad, and he's ready to get married, because if he gets married to her, he becomes the king. And that's the only reason that he's really marrying her. But she doesn't know that yet. And she has just gotten into a fight with Shrek, so she doesn't think that Shrek really appreciates her or loves her or has any feelings for her, even though they were kind of building this bond as Shrek was bringing her to Farquaad. And Donkey starts talking to Shrek, and he tells Shrek, when Fiona was talking about the ugly beast, the ogre, she didn't even call it an ogre. She called it the ugly beast, I think. That's when Shrek turned against her.
Well, because it's insulting him.
Yeah, and Donkey brings it out. He's like, why'd you change your feelings toward Fiona? And Shrek tells him, because she was talking about this ugly beast. And he's like, she wasn't talking about you. She was talking about her. And Shrek all of a sudden turns in and he's like, oh my gosh. And Donkey knows that Shrek has feelings for Fiona and Fiona has feelings for Shrek.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Fiona's at the altar with Farquaad, and Donkey's like, you better get there and stop this wedding, because she's going to be getting married to Farquaad, and we know that he's doing it just to be king, and you love her. So they end up going to break up the wedding. And he gets there just before the two of them say, I do. And nightfall is coming. And when he breaks in, Fiona sees him, and Shrek's telling her that, the only reason Farquaad wants to marry her is because he's going to be king. And she thinks about that, and Shrek is there to save her again.
Yeah.
And she's like, how am I going to stop this wedding? So she kind of lets the sun go down and turns into the ogre, thinking, okay, now Farquaad's not going to want to marry me. And sure enough, that's what happens. And Farquaad, tries to lock her up and lock Shrek up and all this kind of stuff. Again, to get to what he wants, which is to be king.
Mm-hmm.
But now Fiona and Shrek are feeling that togetherness again.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes in life, that's what a relationship is like. It starts off like in the dating phase when you finally meet that person, and you're kind of like on the honeymoon side of the dating phase, right? And then as you're going through that and you start getting used to each other, sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, you know, what used to be so igniting every time I saw you, the other person, all of a sudden starts to become, oh, well, yeah, I see you again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, you know, it becomes like routine, and that spark starts to fade
Mm-hmm.
because you start to take each other for granted. And then you could get into some arguments, and at that point, things start to spiral down even more. So you need to find those things in each other again, those similarities, those things that really sparked your light for each other, to bring it back up, if in fact that's truly there. But oftentimes when we start off relationships, we're not really ourselves. We're the fairy princess, or we're, you know, the beautiful Fiona in those initial starts of our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And we never let the ogre out, but the ogre is part of us. And we need to let the other person know the whole of us. And we need to allow ourselves to be our whole in order to be able to have a relationship that can withstand challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually when shit hits the fan, we tend to go back to our dark side. We go back to where we're comfortable when things are happening around us that we don't have control over. And sometimes that's a different person than we showed when we first met our true love, when we first met the person that we have the relationship with. When even we do that with people on our teams, when we're leaders.
Mm-hmm.
We come across as this very caring leader, but then when we get a lot of pressure placed on us, we may start to be more directing of our team. We may be more, we don't couch so much of what we need to get done in sugar. And when the team starts to first feel that, they're like, what the hell? You know, what's wrong with you? And now you lose their trust.
Mm-hmm.
So in a relationship, relationships apply to teams, apply to business, and apply to romantic or friendships as well. And we need to allow ourselves to really recognize who we are. And when we do get into this, you know, sometimes you can say this to your team, you know, when things are going well and you're leading and all that kind of stuff, kind of it, especially as a leader, when you come into a new team,
Mm-hmm.
they don't know you, you don't know them. Everybody's kind of on their best behavior. And then things start to happen, and you have to say, hey, you know, things have changed. We got this heavy duty pressure on us to get things done. We're going to have to be a little less of a team-based decision. We're going to have to be a little bit more focused on getting the shit done right now. And when you preface your changes by kind of talking about it ahead of time, everybody can kind of understand. And as long as it doesn't, as long as you don't take it too far, everybody's going to be fine with it being a temporary situation, as opposed to the way that you normally treat the team, or that normally treat your spouse, your friends, your girlfriend, whatever. And I think that, you know, all this stuff comes out in the movie, and we realize that we all have a little ogre in us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with it, because that ogre is also oftentimes the warrior, the protector. And the protector has a reason for being we all have multiple personalities. And we let those personalities come out at different times for whatever that happens to be. We are the charming Prince Charming or Princess Fiona. We are the ogre. We are the donkey. And then you go on, and we are the Puss in Boots.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, kind of the warrior with the sword and the protector and so forth. We have all of those personalities within us, and they all come out at certain times. And if we recognize that, we allow others to kind of see that in a light that's not unexpected or that lasts so long or that's very directive of the other person, I think it's all something that people can accept.
I can see that. I agree. So I have a thought, and I'm going to run with it. In the movie, Shrek says, "Are you good? I don't want to."
Yeah, go.
Shrek tells Donkey at one point that he's like an onion, and he explains that onions have layers. And I think what's interesting for me is how an onion has layers, but so does, like, Shrek has layers, Fiona has layers, you have layers, I have layers. It doesn't matter who it was in the character, we all have those. And for me, I was trying to figure out, like, okay, so what would be something that they need? Because Shrek personally needed Fiona. Puss in Boots needed Donkey in different ways. Donkey needed the dragon.
Yes.
And they play these crucial roles in each other's onion. And the way I was here, and I'm writing all these things down of what I think it could connect to because of the layers of the onion and all that, and Shrek's analogy. And I came up with spaghetti, like, because it's not easy like an onion. You have layers of an onion, but you may be an onion. But when you take spaghetti, it's all mixed up. And it's going to have a whole bunch of other things mixed. Then you start adding in the meats. That would be donkey. Oh, that sounded bad. But then you turn around and you have Lord Farquaad. Lord Farquaad's mushrooms or jalapenos in your spaghetti. And that's not something you want. And they had to learn through this. So for me, I was thinking of that. And then I was like, well, that's not a tool. That's a food. And in my head, the balancing of each creates a stronger layer because Shrek only made it certain levels. And then Fiona comes into his life, or Donkey comes into his life. And then Puss in Boots. And he keeps layering up another level, and he doesn't even realize it at first. And then he's on this grand adventure just trying to save his property, and he ends up meeting Fiona, who takes him to this level, like in love and things he never thought he'd get. And I came up with how when you do like a cement, I'm giving you my tool just so you know. When you get, because obviously the spaghetti can't work. When you're layering up from one to another, you might not always see it. They might be a thin layer, and then they have a bigger one. It's like building steps or a house. You have to have a good foundation, which sometimes you have to put one or two things of cement down and all that. And you got to see how the ground's going to take it, how other things are. You can't build something without a good foundation, and without a good foundation to make sure it's level, you can't do it without a trowel. So I was picturing a hand trowel because it builds up each layer, and through each one, you're building a better you to get to the highest thing. So the foundation was Shrek with Donkey. And then Puss in Boots comes in, and it builds the framing of the house, and then it turns around. So that's why I was like, oh, a trowel's perfect because it builds each layer up a little more and more. So for me, I liked the spaghetti because I was able to take all the stuff and put it together. But there's not a tool that I can use for that. So the trowel made me think outside the box with this because I really see Fiona being somebody that without Fiona, Shrek wouldn't be his best him. But without Shrek, Fiona wouldn't become her best her.
That's really, I like your analogy there. And the way I also look at it is, when you get a trowel, you can have various types of trowels, right? And when you're putting down adhesives, like you're talking about kneading, kind of the glue or the cement, or when you're laying tile, you've got to put the thin set on there. And a trowel you can actually run across, and it can leave straight lines. It can take this blop of thin set that you put on the floor to glue the tile down, and then you run the trowel across, and it leaves lines, because when you squish things together, you need to have room for that thin set to kind of even out and really get a good adhesive touch.
Mm-hmm.
But you've basically taken your spaghetti and almost like combed it out into straight line pieces. So that is really what life is about. Life is a bowl of spaghetti. Life is a plop of thin set. And if you just try to jam it down all at one time, it's not going to work real well. But if you can run a trowel through it, or even run a fork through your spaghetti to straighten it out, and sometimes you're even going to run into knots. You're going to run into a piece of rock in your trowel or something along those lines, and all of a sudden that nice straight line gets a little effed up. And you've got to go in there and actually pick those stones out, or take that knot out, in order to be able to make things go further. But it can be a process, and you can get perturbed, pissed off, when you take that trowel and you put it down, and you go to lay your tile on it, and there's a rock in there, and it's like you cannot get that tile to lay flat until you get the rock out. But now you got to peel that tile off. And I don't know if anybody's run into this, but it would be the same thing as like if you're gluing a piece of paper, construction paper onto another piece of paper, and then you see that there's something stuck underneath it. Now you got to figure out, how do I take that off without tearing it, without breaking it, in order to get that thing that's under there out of there so it can lay flat again. And that time can take a lot of effort and a lot of time as you're working through those troubled parts of life, of leadership, of our perspective. Oftentimes we need to comb, and then guess what? If you're to take it even to the concept of your hair, if you don't comb it frequently, it starts to get knotted up. And then when you're pulling the comb through, it gets even harder and harder. I know, Brandon, that may not be something that you run into that often. And for that matter, it isn't much that I run into either.
I'm sorry. This is not letting me shave for a few days. You can see how bad that U is. Like, I was not meant to have hair. I started balding at 16. I'm not even kidding. I had the V at 16. So I've been shaving my head so long, the bald jokes don't even faze me,
Well, my forehead has gone back dramatically, and it's starting to meet that part in the back here that's coming up. But the key is that with this is, you need to continue to work through that. You need to run the trowel numerous times before it clears out. You need to run your comb through your hair many times. And when those knots are there, it becomes painful. It becomes challenging. And sometimes you have to cut that knot out, which in those cases, sometimes you have to let people go in your relationship, or you have to separate and get into a different degree of separation in that relationship, because you don't want to throw your friend away, but you can't spend the same amount of time together because you're growing in different directions.
Correct.
And that's life. And that's also knowing your boundaries and knowing your space and knowing your swamp. Not to say that I need to banish them to far, far away, but I do need to live in my swamp and not have somebody, splashing around in it all the time.
Correct.
I need to have people that help to maintain my swamp the way that I want the swamp to be. But I have to appreciate that there's other swamps out there and they look different than mine. And that doesn't make mine better than theirs or theirs better than mine. And we have to live together.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start to appreciate each other's swamps a little bit more, open up to it, recognize that there are a lot of commonalities to our swamps. There's still ground, there's still rocks, there's still grass. How they're manicured, how they come together are different.
I actually think of the show Wife Swap. So think of that.
Okay.
You don't know the show?
Uh-uh.
Oh, it's popular back in the day. So what they would do is they'd take extreme opposites, an atheist family and a Christian family, a African American and a white, and they would switch spouses, a homosexual and a Christian, like things like that, okay? And
homosexual and heterosexual.
Yes.
Not a homosexual and a Christian. They're not opposite. There's a lot of homosexuals that are Christian.
Touche. Someone who's who's a homophobic with somebody who's, and it was interesting because so the show started with having it be you'd see the differences and see like the grass isn't always greener on the other side, but then it turned into just being drama upon drama upon drama. And they knew that was where their ratings were getting it, so they did that. But the first few years, it was a funny show because it really did, by the end of each episode, make you open your eyes a little bit and see that, like, the husband came home and he'd be like, "Oh, I didn't do anything. I haven't been helping you in years. I'm really sorry." Da 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 da. And the wife would come back and it'd be like, "Honey, I really I've done this, and this, but I could do this better." It was interesting because people were willing to actually be open to seeing the other side, that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and that they needed to treat others with respect, and they needed to connect things instead of think like my yard's better than yours or my swamp's better than yours. It's the opposite. It's
like my swamp is different than yours.
Yes, thank you. I was like, mine isn't better. It's just different. It's finding the uniqueness in the opposite side, not just thinking the grass is always greener.
It's finding the uniqueness and finding the similarities. And this is what we've talked about in some of our past episodes. When we talk about the issues between the U.S. and China,
yes,
we start. We're generalizing this whole big thing, and then individuals are taking it upon themselves to try to change the others, as opposed to recognize, that there is a difference. And when we have governments talking to governments, that has nothing to do really with the individual relating to another individual.
Mm-hmm.
People are people too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, governments should be of the people, for the people, by the people, all that kind of stuff, but that's horseshit, to be perfectly honest. Our governments become bureaucratic political machines that are not representing the people in general.
Nope.
And definitely not the people as individuals.
No.
And this is where we start to get into these differences, like, big knots that you can't get out because there's this big brother over the top fighting and creating this divisiveness, this divide between us. When if we really get down to the core of the fact that you're a person, I'm a person, they're a person. Now let's look at the fact that we all have arms, legs, commonality, brains, eyes, whatever. Now let's talk to them one-on-one. Yep. Let's recognize that we do have an ogre and we do have the Prince Charming or the Princess Fiona are all part of us. And let's appreciate the differences and realize the value of those differences, as opposed to try to talk about differences as being bad.
I agree. When you find something is different, why does it have to be bad right away? I think a lot of people do that. It's not the way I want it. It's not the way I do it. A good example of that, for real, is, and you're going to know this, because if I say the wrong country, I know you're going to fix me on this. In the United States, we do a thumbs up, but in other countries, they go like this. It's their thumbs up. And for us, if you go to another country and they do that, you're gonna be like, why is everybody flipping me off? Why are you, what the heck? You know? But here, that's
Well, if I'm not mistaken, like here, this could mean A-okay, but if you do that in like Italy, that means you're an asshole.
And sign language, you're an asshole.
So, you know, there's definitely differences that we can't appreciate. And one big one that when I was over in India, or I worked with people from India, when they say yes, they're shaking their head like this. That's yes. But when we say yes, it's this, and no is this. So when we see somebody saying yes and doing this, we're like, do you not know what you're doing? You know, you're not making any sense with what you're doing.
Your own body almost didn't let you do it. You were like, yeah.
Exactly, because we become ingrained in our thoughts and in our actions in those types of motions and in beliefs. And religions are very good at trying to point out that, you know, the way we believe is better than the way you believe. Politics is the way our party believes is better than the way your party believes. In countries, the way we treat our people and the way you treat your people are better. And we point those things out, and you know, we rarely get to the point where we get to true love's kiss, which to me is the recognition that we are who we are and we can appreciate others' differences. And in fact, there's going to be a lot of times when we actually can incorporate those differences into our world, which makes our world better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we become true love's form, or love's true form, however you want to look at it. But it is when, as we become more open to differences and appreciate those differences and celebrate those differences as opposed to attack those differences, that's when the world comes together. And sometimes it takes massive pain before we get to that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I think we're experiencing today may be, you know, that turning point in human society and humanity, where there's a lot of pain going on. There's a lot of this focus on differences. There's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of all of the difference between the light side and the dark side, between the beautiful princess and the ogre. And those are just continued to be played upon. And yet there's still a movement going on underneath of people trying to break that down and to bring things together. And I don't think that as a human race, we would ever get to be, you know, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
A beautiful functioning commune. That's actually the concept of communism.
Yes.
Which to me, you know, there's a competitiveness in nature. There's a competitiveness in the human race that I think leads to the focus on differences.
Mm-hmm.
But can come together, and we can change the meaning of things. We can change the meanings that we've placed on things, or the words that we've placed on things. And one thing I came up with is looking at the word ogre.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you're looking at Shrek, or others. Becomes, you know, starts off as opinionated.
Mm-hmm.
And as we grow, it becomes open-minded. The G starts off as grim and kind of moves forward toward genuine. R starts off as resentment or resented and moves to respected. E is kind of elusive and to ourselves, and it goes to empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking at some of the other things that within the movie, you know, antisocial to accepted. That's, and terrible to terrific.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at it and in those
Right.
concepts, ogre goes from ogre meaning ogre to great. Great. Change. If we just go into our world, our own individual worlds, and we look at some of these words or some of the things that we've chosen to place meanings on, and we take those negatives and we find an opposite word, an antonym to that, and then start looking at those same events, those same people, those same letters in the word as going from a negative meaning to, or a non-empowering meaning to an empowering meaning, and we just think those through consistently, life changes.
It does.
Because the words we choose, the meanings we choose to place on events can be negative and positive. If we can take those negatives and turn them into positives, we go from the dark side to the light side.
Yes. I agree.
So ogre can go from being something that is got this very negative connotation to, oh, great. Like life is there for me. And it goes from a negative connotation to a positive connotation. And all we did is change the word and the meaning behind it.
You know, I actually like how you did that. So what was your tool, since I gave you mine?
Well, I was thinking that a big part of all the characters had to do with image, self-image, and others' image of us, and our perception of others' image toward us.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of looking at the tool as a camera and which direction we're pointing that camera. Because oftentimes we think we're looking through the camera at somebody, but we're actually interpreting what we're seeing through our own filters and perceptions. So what's actually being seen, what's actually there is being filtered, putting a gray filter, a blue filter, a green filter in front of it. And we're actually not seeing the true love's form or love's true form. We're seeing one that's been tainted by those things within us.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes when we're looking at ourselves, you know, we're pointing the camera inwardly and we're trying to interpret or where our own self-perception is what we believe is behind the camera looking at us. And those same filters are put on there. So that was kind of what I was getting at is, you know, which direction you're pointing your camera, what filters are going on in that camera. And most of the time we're in control of the camera's direction and the filter, regardless of which way the camera's looking.
Mm-hmm.
So we can look at ourselves as the beautiful princess or the ogre, and then recognize that the ogre's not so ugly. In fact, the ogre is very beautiful. The ogre's got a reason for being who the ogre is. And it's something to appreciate the difference and recognize that when we look at the ogre in that light, the ogre is beautiful. And so that whole perception of ugly and beautiful in terms of nature, in terms of our nature, you know, the nature of who we are, is based on which way the camera is pointing and which perceptions are being used as filters of what's actually coming through the lens.
Hmm. You really did take that in a different direction on me.
But I think that, yours and mine are actually tied together.
I don't mean it like that. The way you described, the way you pictured the movie, like they are tied together. I agree with you on that. But I'm like going through what you're saying, and I'm looking at it, going, "Wait a minute! Like, isn't that what almost everything we do? You and I have a laptop in front of us right now. We have a camera in front of us right now. I have a cell phone in front of me right now, and if I get a text message, an email. I can't see any of my emails. If I get anything there behind it, it pops up, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It shows everything there. And then that alters the way we see ourselves. And that's how you're supposed to be watching is like, we as people should not be going one way like that. It should be where the lens is on yourself, but it's so easy to see how others are. That's why social media is so is you become famous for different things, and you go viral, as they say,
Well, and I think that's a very good example is that how do you go viral? You point out differences. You are different. You act different. You interpret things differently. And even what we're doing here is to try to interpret things differently so that people tune in. And hopefully we're doing it in an empowering way, in a way that people can relate to and then bring into their lives and look at life in a different way that's going to be more empowering to them and to others around them. So differences are something that are always focused on. Question that we have to always have as we're starting to see those differences are, how can we appreciate the difference and how can we live with those differences, as opposed to, oh, those are different, they are bad, they are not the same as me, they're not as good as mine. So that goes back to, really the filters that we have in place, and those are our belief systems. And as I've talked about in many, many, many of our
discussions is you have to question the BS bullshit behind your belief systems, and then to open up and recognize that differences are not bad. In most cases, differences are just differences, and events are just events. And we have the filters that decide whether that's good or bad. It is our choice how we interpret those things. Even the worst things that we experience in life, the worst things that we see in life, do have some silver linings. We just have to find them in our mind, remove some filters that may keep us from seeing those, and then to be able to take those learnings and to be able to leverage them and to use them in an empowering way for ourselves, in leading me, myself, and I, so that when we're interacting with others, we can help to lead them in a direction that is more empowering to them, to us, and to the world. I like that. I think this was a good one, buddy. I love Shrek.
I love Shrek, and I agree. I love Donkey, and I love Donkey's relationship with Dragon, and I love the babies. I think the babies are just an excellent way to really tie together everything that we've said. And here are the differences of the dragon with the wings that blows fire, and you've got the donkey, and together you've got donkeys with, the babies are donkeys with wings that when they sneeze they blow fire, and
they're doggins.
Yeah, it's amazing. But when you actually bring those differences together, they're beautiful.
They are,
and they're a new being, and there's so much to cherish about them, and it brings races together, it brings countries together, it brings religions together, when you actually allow yourselves to bring in the differences as opposed to try to block them out.
I agree. Very well said. All right, mister. I brought us in, you bring us out.
All right, everybody. I hope you appreciate what we've done today with Shrek and brought that Shrek into the world that we live in today. And hopefully it's become something that you can think about. Again, it's all about thinking about things in a different way. And I am Brett Gordon with Businesses Are People Too. I work with leaders and individuals to be able to really look at things from a different perspective, to understand ourselves better, to understand our teams better, and to understand our businesses better. When we do that, we all work together much better.
I agree.
And this is Brandon Croucher of Delight CBD, the calm, balanced, and delightful approach to life through hemp CBD.
Perfect. Sorry, I was making faces. I was trying to make it where it would look really funny with you, but it didn't work. Yes, thank you very much. Delight Cafe CBD, the only odorless, colorless, tasteless CBD for the person on the go. Add it to anything to be able to find your calm, your balance, and your delight when you need it most. It's as easy as A, B, CBD.
Awesome. All right, everybody, have a great day. Have a great week. And we'll be back with you again next week. Take care.